In 2007, in this very room, Professor Elżbieta Matynia gave a memorable talk titled What Wroclaw Gave the World. Today, we are here in this special place to celebrate what Elżbieta Matynia has given us, our community, and the world. The Museum of Architecture, where we currently find ourselves, is one of the distinctive institutions in Wrocław's cultural landscape. Established in 1965, the museum has played a key role in the exploration and preservation of the unique architectural heritage of the city, much of it linked to its German past at a time when that past was being forgotten and brutally erased. It was this institution, under the leadership of the first director, Olgierd Czerner, that was engaged when the Jewish cemetery in Wrocław was endangered. Similarly, the museum's second director, Dr. Jerzy Ilkosz, was key to researching and protecting Wrocław's very important German modernist heritage, including what is now recognized, largely thanks to his efforts, as the UNESCO World Heritage Site, Centennial Hall. Thanks to such work, the Museum of Architecture has become a bridge connecting the different histories and communities of this city, despite changing political boundaries and state agendas. 2 years ago, the museum connected Wrocław with New York, German Breslau with Polish Wrocław, and opened up the possibilities of a richer understanding of the German-Jewish past of the city at a time of growing pressures to reduce memory to nativist narratives of the past. After the death of Professor Fritz Stern, the museum, with the support of the city of Wrocław, undertook a major endeavor of receiving and celebrating a special gift, a full set of furniture designed for the Stern family around 1900 by the illustrious Breslau architect and educator Hans Pelzik. When the Stern family was escaping terror before the Second World War, the furniture traveled with them from Nazi Germany to New York, where it remained as a family treasure from a lost homeland for almost 80 years. Today, this Stern-Pelzik heritage is furnishing the public space of Wrocław. Through their place in this museum, these personal objects are integrated into the complex public memoryscape of the city. I would like to thank the Museum of Architecture for continuing this tradition of public engagement. The museum is one of the co-organizers and sponsors of our celebrations, absolutely crucial in making them possible. So please join me in thanking the museum, especially its current director, Michal Duda. I would also like to thank the city of Wrocław for bringing the distinguished speaker, Professor Jarosław Chrycak from Lviv, at this very important historical moment. My gratitude goes also to the New School for Social Research, represented here by many, but especially the Dean, Professor Alexander Alejnikov, and Vice Dean Robert Koscheva, for co-sponsoring this event. Finally, a special thanks to another important academic partner, the DSW University of Lower Silesia, long-term local co-organizer of the Democracy and Diversity Institute, who generously co-sponsored our event. I welcome Director, Professor Slavomir Křichal. In closing, I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to so many individuals who have contributed to today's event. I will ask their forgiveness for not mentioning them by name, but I thank them from the bottom of my heart. I now invite Marci Shore and her guests to the podium, and they're already there, to introduce the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you all for coming. It's very nice to see you here. It's nice to see this full room, and nice to see lots of old friends and students. I'm going to introduce everybody very briefly because I think most of you already know everybody. Let me start with Krzysztof Czyzewski. I will go in this order. Krzysztof Czyzewski comes from the world of avant-garde theater. He is one of the founders and the director of the Borderlands Foundation. And Alice Curry is a philosopher at the New School in New York. Jan Gross is a historian, professor emeritus at Princeton University. Jaroslav Hrycak is also a historian at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Agnieszka Graf is a feminist scholar at the University of Warsaw, but at a specific center at the University of Warsaw.
American Studies.
American Studies, that's what, okay. American Studies at the University of Warsaw, and Jacek Koltan is a social theorist at the European Solidarity Center in Gdańsk. That's my extremely brief introduction. So this is an unscripted conversation, so I'm going to start by talking for just a couple minutes about where I see the impetus for the conversation coming from, and then I will turn it over. But I did not ask anybody to prepare anything in advance. I was hoping we could practice an art that I know Krzysztof in particular is a master of, the sztuka rozmowy, the art of conversation. And I feel like when people are speaking improvisationally, there is always a chance that something new will happen, that some new idea will come up, that somebody will provoke somebody to think of something they haven't thought of before. And I find that in some ways to be especially urgent right now, when I get up every morning and keep shaking myself and everybody else and saying, there must be something we haven't thought of yet. It can't be that we're all just sitting, you know, and watching the world end in front of us. Like, there must be something we haven't thought of yet. Come on, all these, you get enough smart people in the room, you get enough coffee, somebody will come up with some new idea, and I continue to hold out that faith. So I have some of my favorite conversation partners here. The topic of today is beyond violence. And I want to start out by saying I think we should talk about violence, and I think we should talk about evil. And I think these are two related but distinct topics. And I'll do the thing that probably one is not actually supposed to do when they're introducing a panel, which is I'll talk about myself for just like 90 seconds. You can indulge me. So watching what is happening, what's been happening for the past 10 years, what's been happening for the past 9 years, what's been happening for the past year and a half since the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. I have, like I think many of us, found myself kind of existentially in a situation I never expected to find myself in. I am the great-granddaughter of pogrom victims. My great-grandparents were Jews living in the Pale settlement who fled pogroms and fled violence by Ukrainians. My great-grandmother, who is my maternal great-grandmother, is the only one of them who I actually knew because she was still alive when I was a child. Her fiance was killed in front of her in a small village by the Dnipro near Cherkasy. In some ways, I suppose I'm a beneficiary of that murder because she then married the person who became my great-grandfather. But in any case, they were part of a wave of Jewish immigration from the Pale settlement that was, needless to say, not nostalgic about the place they had come from. I then grew up in suburban Pennsylvania in a community in which, there were Holocaust survivors. My Hebrew school teacher was an Auschwitz survivor. His wife was an Auschwitz survivor. There was extreme antipathy towards Germans, definitely through the 70s and 80s, and there were unwritten rules about not studying German and not buying German cars and not having anything to do with Germany. And then I became a peace activist in high school, and in April 1989, maybe Elżbieta will remember this, I went to Abby Hoffman's memorial service with peace sign earrings and a tie-dye t-shirt. I have never even let my kids have a squirt gun. My son has been begging and pleading for a Nerf gun for years, and I have categorically said no, nothing that even resembles a weapon in our house. So now here I am, like the middle-aged Jewish mother, like peace activist, and now I go to the Germans, and now I go to Capitol Hill, and I plead with Americans and Germans and everyone else I can to immediately send lethal weapons to Ukraine. This was not a position I ever could have imagined that I would find myself in. I mean, it reminds me of something that my Calvinist priest, Polish friend Kazik Ben would say, that now you know that there is a God and he has a sense of humor. It's not a position I ever could have imagined I would find myself in. And it's something that I do in a state of despair and with a state of tragedy. And George Orwell said that every revolution is a failure in its own way. I mean, every war is a tragedy in its own way. But it's something like, you know, my like little moonlighting career as a weapons agitator. It's something I've also done despite the despair with no ambivalence. Like, I don't have actually any doubt in a way that normally my whole life is plagued with doubt. But in this particular situation, I don't actually have any doubt that this is what has to happen, that Ukraine has to be given these weapons, that Putin's regime has to fall, that it has to be decisive. And so this strange combination of a kind of lack of ambivalence and a despair and, you know, a kind of surrealist irony that has run through that has been a kind of motif, at least for me, from my, you know, very self-centered viewpoint coming since the war began. And that relationship to violence, you know, and the fact that still not letting my son have the Nerf gun, even though he constantly calls and says, what do I have to do to get the Nerf gun? That I still, you know, I'm still every day, you know, pleading for these weapons. You know, I just met with like the Austrian ambassador and say, how can we get them? How can we get them? Like, what do we have to do? What has to happen? Like, what has to move so you can send that, so you can send that, so you can send that? I didn't even know what these weapons were before this full-scale invasion started. And I'm now going to start with Krzysztof because Krzysztof came to New York in, maybe it was April? I mean, it was maybe 6 weeks after the start of the full-scale invasion last year. And I was telling this to Krzysztof, you know, and I said, how could I be the person pleading for weapons? Like, how could I be the person pleading for weapons without any ambivalence? And in some sense, without even feeling like I've had any kind of ideological metamorphosis since my, you know, peace sign wearing years. Like, I don't actually feel that my fundamental ideas about the world have actually changed very much since then. You know, and Krzysztof said that, well, you know, like, of course I know how you feel because that's what I was in Bosnia in the 1990s. And I saw what happened in Srebrenica. That was the end of my pacifism. So, I mean, obviously, like, not everyone has pacifist inclinations to begin with, and there are, like, plenty of people in the world who are attracted to violence, but the idea that many people who never thought they could have imagined themselves supporting anything military or supporting any kind of violence have found ourselves in this position, you know, is, I think, perhaps intellectually, you know, a point of departure. As is looking back, you know, on what happened in Bosnia, which was the beginning, you know, of this post-communist period and put us in this narrative arc. And it was the moment that we really thought that that was kind of like some kind of anomaly and that it was going to be over and then we were going to all proceed on the path towards the end of history and liberal democracy after that little kind of blip was edited out. And now looking back, and Krzysztof and Malgosia and Tim and I watched the film Quo Vadis, Aida and Krasno Gruda last year, and I thought, my God, how can, about the Srebrenica massacre, you know, and these disempowered UN Dutch soldiers who get, and I thought, how can this be that after everything we know and everything we've learned that we are now just sitting and watching people being slaughtered again? Like, how did we find ourselves in this situation where we have, like, all these smart people, all these sensitive people? How have we not thought of something? So I want to put that on the table. I want us to, like, talk about our relationship to violence. The other thing I want to throw out, and then I'm going to have Krzysztof start, then we'll ask some questions to our friends and colleagues, is that when I was watching Belarus 3 years ago, I was sure, not that I had any inside knowledge, I was sure they had it. Like, when I saw when I saw how many people they got on the streets in Belarus, like a place you just wouldn't have expected this, and then there it was. There it was, suddenly, you know, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets behaving with extraordinary dignity, you know, and solidarity, and love. Yeah, and absolutely committed to nonviolence. And when I saw the workers shouting at Lukashenko, "Uhadi, Uhadi," I thought, it's over. It's over. The social contract is broken. Nobody believes in this man anymore. They have the majority on their side. It's over. You know, and then Putin came in and they reinforced Lukashenko with sheer violence. was just, and everybody knew it. I mean, it was like Czechoslovakia in 1968 in that sense. The cat was out of the bag. Everyone knew that nobody wanted this, that it was just violence, that it was just sheer violence. And now even the people I knew in Belarus who were most deeply, philosophically, ethically, ideologically committed to that nonviolent position, you know, now they've started to say like, well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we needed to have used violence. Maybe if we had used violence, we wouldn't be in this situation now. Maybe Ukraine wouldn't be in this situation now, which is a kind of extraordinary thing for people to admit for whom nonviolence wasn't just like a mood on a certain day, but was a kind of deeply felt philosophical and ethical position. Okay, so I've already talked too much, so let me open this up and I will let Krzysztof start. And maybe I should give you that microphone because I'm afraid this cord might otherwise trip.
Thank you, Marci, for this introduction. I feel how the war in Ukraine is shaping you and your thoughts and the position you have toward the world. And I think it reminds my experience. Of course, it's at the same way important for me, but the life-changing experience with war for me was during the Balkan wars. And when I was listening in the morning session, the students of the seminar of democracy, how participation in this seminar changed your life, I will always came back to my experiences with the war, which really make a big difference for me. And also it is connected in the way how I understand democracy also, and how I feel we should change our attitude to the democracy, to the language we use for the democracy, and put new words and change old words in our vocabulary. For example, violence is one of these words. Yeah? Is it true that Ukrainians respond with violence to the violence? I'm not comfortable with this statement. There is something different to fight in self-defense and something different to use violence for aggression. And so I've never think about Ukrainians as using violence in this war. And sometimes the problems with the language is also with killing. You know, there are two Hebrew words for this commandment, nie zabijaj. Yeah, harak, don't kill, and ratzech, don't murder. And from that very point, it was a difference. So that could be a wrongful killing. Yeah? So killing is not all. It could be a wrongful killing. It means that there are some other killings in this struggle. So that's at that very moment in the siege Sarajevo in Bosnia and where I was, or in Kosovo, exactly my feeling as a person who believed in not putting arms to hands to solve problems and so on, was stuck at that moment because I wanted to take a weapon to my hands, and if I would have the possibility, I would do it, because when you have a butcher in the room, killing innocent people, you are responsible to answer, yes, to make a countermeasure to the evil, yeah? And that's how are you in the position to react, because you love these people. That was the first feeling. When we started to think about taking weapons to the hands in Bosnia, it was not about hatredness, it was about love and responsibility for the people So hatredness comes, and it is a poison which comes with the war, but it comes later when you are attacked as an innocent group of people. And I have many friends among Ukrainians now who shared with me this feeling of hatredness, and I know it is in the ground, but the first reaction they had to participate in the war was because of love. It was because of responsibility. That's what makes you do such things. There are, to compare former Yugoslavia with Ukraine, there are certain important things, changes. I don't know if you remember that there was an embargo for weapons to Bosnia at that time. Yeah, you wasn't allowed to help with weapons to Bosnians, Kosovars. Yes, so we were in Europe in a kind of a zone of comfort, which means that you are a humanist, we are civilized people in Europe, and we can help you Bosnians, sending medicine support, some food, but we don't touch the weapon because we are a humanist, we are civilized people. And when you are in the war, when you are in Sarajevo, when you are in Kiev, hearing this kind of narration, it is, I don't know if it could be stronger harm you can do for the people, because you put them in the position of being barbarians somehow. Yeah, so we keep distance. That was exactly the position of Europe at that time. Yeah, what these barbarians do in the Balkans. Yeah, of course we are humanists and we can help with food support and medicine, but so now, with your action, Marci, and many of us, is a huge change that we are engaged, civic society is engaged in supporting Ukrainian army. And not only from outside, but also from inside. I think it's a thing we don't know very much about, how civic society of Ukrainians built the army, the Ukraine army. That the strength, of course, it is a huge external Western support to that, but the army stood on legs thanks to civic society engagement, financial, voluntary. It's, we were proud in Poland, raising money for one drone for Ukrainian army, initiated by Sławek Sierakowski. They, in Ukraine, I mean civic society, people buying thousands of drones for the army. Yeah. So each grosz, each cent they have, when artists, writers coming to our residence and earn a little money, we do an auction and so on. The first thing they are thinking about is how they can send to Ukrainian army. So this is, I think, this connection between civic society and support of the army is a completely new thing. So, being civic society, we were familiar only, to protest against the war as a civic society. Yeah. Now we are in complete different situation. Why is so? I think there is a word which I would propose to have it in our universal global language, like we have human rights or ahimsa of Gandhi, peremocha, the victory. Yeah, but I don't like this translation victory because it's not the same. Yeah, the peremocha it means this Ukrainian word that mohti, we can, but also, and there are two levels of that. That's how my Ukrainian friends, learn me this word, that you can do more. And I think this second, you can do more, is crucial because for many years we did many things. We had rights, we were on the right side of the values of good things in the world, but always we were defeated. So our situation, I would say, for years was that we are comfortable because we defend the right things and values, but we are familiar and accustomed with that always we are defeated. What Ukrainians did, they put on the stake peremocha. So it's not only about being right, but to defeat the evil, because there is no other way. So it's the new, you see, it is new vocabulary in our democracy language. Yeah, it's a little space for negotiations. You can negotiate with your enemy. You can negotiate with a person thinking indifferently. You can negotiate with an enemy country or some other, conflicted situation. As we learn in democracy, we can negotiate and have a good thing out of that. But you can't negotiate with evil. And I don't mean by evil that somebody is evil, or there is a group of people evil, or there is a nation which is evil. No, but sometimes it happens that the people are possessed by evil. It doesn't mean that they are fully evil. But there is a situation that the evil possessed some groups of people. And the only way you can fight with it is to defeat it, to kill. So there is no negotiation with evil. And is it against democracy? That's the problem, I think, for our democratic societies was that we put evil aside, not only of our vocabulary, but reality. And for me, the first experience was in Bosnia, that it is real. And as a pacifist, my belief was, that there is something, the wrong thing is an aggression. So when you put down your arm, your weapon, the others will do the same. So you solve the situation of disarming yourself. Yeah, I'm putting aside the weapons and I expect the other will do the same. That's exactly the gesture people coming to Srebrenica peace zone did. You don't want to fight, you put the arm down. And it was the reason why they were killed, all of them. Yeah, so you have on the other side, not the fighters, like in the battlefield. You have evil which will kill because you put down the weapon, because you are weak, because you are unarmed. That was the situation, not only in Srebrenica, but in other cases. So that's a lesson out of that. And of course, there are different ways how to deal with this new peremocha word in the world, in our languages, and so on. But I think it's that we are in a position of beliefs that we can do more. And when I am coming today, a few weeks ago, to Tbilisi, when I coming to Belarus, you are mentioning they have this behind this question. Maybe we could do more. It's not. You see, it is not to make any judgment on them. And I'm far away to judge people, the Belarusian revolution or the Roses revolution in Georgia. But there is something that comes to their minds thanks to Ukrainians today, that there is a possibility at stake that you can do more. Maybe I will end for that moment in this point.
How do you want to go?
Okay, do you want to go next, or should I?
You should direct. Let us know how you'd like us to proceed.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask Jan then. You spent a lot of time 20-some years ago getting your mind inside the Jedwabne massacre, asking how violence was possible. Under what circumstances people wanted to kill other people, were willing to kill other people. Under what circumstances people made decisions that they perhaps couldn't have imagined themselves making before. Does having immersed yourself in that microhistory, in that moment, in understanding why people made the decisions they did, give you some insight as to what is happening now?
No, not really. People do all kinds of horrible things, but I've been told this by commentators who have read Neighbors, because they can. And then these things happen. But there is, in my mind, a very important lesson that ought to be drawn from the experience of the Second World War and, if you will, Jedwabne writ large, in other words, the Holocaust, that bears on, in my mind, on what is going on in Ukraine at this point. It seems to me that if one could draw some sort of a clear-cut conclusion as to how to behave, then the fate of the Jews during the war shows to us that whenever civilian population is subjected to murderous violence on the part of armed units, of armed force, this is a kind of a boundary that explodes the framework within which, if you will, Western canon can hold on to its own fundamental principles. And if I were to draw a lesson from this, I would say that whenever civilians are attacked by uniformed or not uniformed and armed outfits, we have to step in, we Europeans. To my mind, there is a clear sequence of events, so to speak, that bears on the situation in Ukraine. The first one that comes to my mind is that we do not, even though we came weak, the collective West, so to speak, slowly to a conclusion, well, actually not so slowly, from the very beginning, the conclusion, this is an aggression that needs to be opposed. We were very slow in the manner in which we dispensed assistance. And I understand the context of it. This was the issue of just thinking through what is it that the Russian leader will do when armed forces of a NATO country are involved in here. This whole nuclear threat, but that's another issue and something to keep in mind also, and in a way debunked It was to a large extent by, I think, your husband, Tim. He discussed what are the ramifications of succumbing to, so to speak, to nuclear blackmail. But and also, of course, it had to do with the inability to conceive that Ukraine will put up effective resistance to Russian invasion. But these were matters of, so to speak, kind of consideration which did not involve a principled stance. A principled stance, to my mind, from the very beginning, would have been to declare Ukraine a no-flight zone. From hour zero, we cannot, having, in general, but having experienced the destruction of European Jews, we cannot allow armed forces to shoot in a kind, if we have the ability to oppose it, on civilians, massively, the way it had been done over there. So this poses, to my mind, a question about the future. I mean, we'll slowly beefing up the support that we offer to Ukrainian armed forces. But I think a very important threshold has not been reflected upon and put on the table, as it were. Why is it that Ukrainian youth is the only youth that has to die in this conflict? This is a fight in which we are all involved in a way, de facto. And we ought to think about when and how we are going to join in this struggle, if we are called upon to do so. There are all kinds of considerations that one might put on the table in the context of this war, but in the way you framed it, speaking of evil, perhaps, and sort of opposition to evil, maybe for the moment this is all that I have to say.
I will pick up then on Jan's idea that we're all involved in this conflict. And we can make that point both specifically, I mean, certainly Poland could make it, the Baltic states could make it in a very historically specific way. We could also make it in a more universal way. We could make it in a 21st century way, that the world is now globalized to an extent it has never historically been, you know, both ontologically and epistemologically. You know, one of the things I thought of when journalists started asking when the war first broke out, well, you're a historian, how is this different from 1942? How is it different from 1939? And I mean, there are many things one can say to that, but one of the first things I told everyone is internet. We're watching it all in real time now. We're watching it all in front of us. Like, imagine we had had a live stream into the gas chambers in 1942, and probably everyone in this room knows the story of Jan Karski and what it took for him to get that story of what was happening to the Jews in Poland, what was happening during the Holocaust, what it took for him to get that smuggled out in the microfilm, in his tooth, to London, to the States, people not believing him. now we're watching it. Now it's all there. It's obnażenia. It's all right in front of us. Now we're watching it all in real time. You know, we're responding in real time. We know things in real time. We can speak to people in real time. You know, and this is all happening in a context in which there's an awareness that, you know, perhaps the lifespan of planet Earth is reaching its end, you know, that we are interconnected, that nuclear war can be such blackmail because we have the possibility of destroying the entire planet, in fact, quite quickly if we wanted to. There are nuclear power plants now in Ukraine that are threatening not just Ukraine, you know, if there's an attack on them. There has been, you know, there was just a dam blown up that has created environmental consequences that cannot possibly be kept inside borders. The story of Chernobyl, you know, which really, I mean, in some ways only in recent years has come out, you know, with, you know, a very accessible and well-researched literature in English, you know, explaining what's happened. I even tried to get my mind around the physics of it, which is not easy because I don't understand anything about physics. But one of the ways in which the Soviet Union cracked and eventually fell was a disaster that could not be contained within borders, however strict censorship was. So I am now going to turn to my non-Slavicist colleague here, who looks at environmental violence to reflect upon the extent to which violence and interconnectedness and the fact of our interconnectedness plays on our relationship to violence, influences our relationship to violence today.
Thank you so much, Marci. So yes, and thank you. It's an honor to be in this company and to be in this larger community. And like others today, I extend my thanks to Elżbieta Matynia for bringing me into this community. I think I want to make two observations about what I will call climate violence and have no hesitation calling climate violence. And one has to do with things that have already been said about nuance we need to observe in talking about violence in response to violence. And the other has to do with the idea that we can see this violence in real time. Because the issue with climate violence is, in a sense, that it takes a lot of work to see it as what it is. So somebody said in a conversation we were in this morning, the world is burning around us. That is, in some sense, literally true with heat waves more widespread than the world has ever seen on several different continents, with the hottest weeks on record that the planet has ever seen just this month. And we should expect, given the death toll from previous heat waves, that hundreds of thousands of people will die. I say that without even mentioning other things on the earth, that other creatures, ecosystems that will also die. And that's just one example of the violence of climate instability. And I mean, there are droughts and floods, and also we would need to talk about other forms of environmental degradation that are also forms of pollution, degradation of the soil, and so forth, that are also killing people around the globe. Having said that, the question, Marci also mentioned our increasingly global world, and part of the difficulty of having climate violence in view, so that it's not just described in our newspapers as a sequence of individual disasters, which tends to be the way these things are reported, is that we need to have a historical view of reaching back hundreds of years, I think, to early modernity. We need to be thinking about social structures that started to develop at that time with the emergence of capitalism, and its expansion in terms of colonialism and the Atlantic slave trade. And we need to think of it with its fossil fuel-driven tendencies towards extractivism, imperialism, and militarism, which connect it to the conflicts that others here are going to discuss. And I want to see those connections, but what we need to see is the creation of a world order with a global north-south dimension in which we recognize generation after generation of sedimented, grievous injustice. And then we recognize that the depredations of climate represent injustice upon injustice, with the most vulnerable around the world, most vulnerable to climate violence. And I think until one has a shifted picture of the world along those lines, the idea of climate violence doesn't come properly into focus. So that's a first point about what it might be. I think seeing in real time climate violence is a really difficult thing to do. For those, and now I'm just going to talk a little bit about responses to climate violence and the language in which we describe them. There is, for people really active in the environmental movements around the world, there are calls, sometimes they are in terms of meeting violence with violence, calls not usually for the taking of life of any kind, but for at least violence in the form of sabotage. Whether it's right to call that violence or not, I think it's a really good question. Under the circumstances, I think I'll close my remarks by talking about ways in which conversations about these things present us with a really serious question. So there was a book that was published a couple of years ago that's gotten a lot of attention. It even spawned its own popular movie. This is a Swedish environmental thinker named Andreas Malm, published a book probably lots of people here have heard of called, provocatively, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. The movie, if you go see it, is literally about how to blow up a pipeline. The book is not. In the movie, one character says to another who's reading the book, but they don't tell you how to do it in it. But the movie is about how to blow up a pipeline. And Malm's argument in his book comes out of a history of social movements in which he draws attention to the methods used in a variety of relatively familiar anti-racist, pro-suffrage for women, anti-British imperialism, various social movements, and tells us that we misremember them as peaceful, and that we misremember the resources that were used for their success. And so he's making a claim about how environmental struggle puts itself at an unnecessary disadvantage, ties its own hands behind its back, if it takes certain methods off the table to start out with. And the conversation that interests me within the climate and environmental movement, the movement for climate and environmental justice, is partly taking that charge as a point of departure and asking whether it's right. Not mostly. I know there may be people here who disagree, and that would certainly be interesting, but the conviction within this movement is mostly that sabotage is morally justified. The question is more whether it's pragmatically appropriate, and the expressions of that view are mostly stemming from recognition of the ways in which repressive security apparatuses have already been tightened to classify acts, direct obstructive action by movement actors as terrorism. So already attempts to clamp down on whether continuing along those lines simply deprives us of democratic, associative ways of organizing to go forward. And And so I think the really difficult question, and I have things to say, but I'm going to end by leaving it as a question, is if not that, then what? What forms of coalitions among social movements, what forms of symbiotic action in existing institutions to change them from within are possible? And I think it's a huge question. And it looks huge if you see the kind of struggle you're engaged in fighting for the environment right now as a more complex and intrinsically more global struggle than any we have precedent for. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on this idea about the global and vulnerability and the ways in which inequality plays out on a global scale. And maybe I will make this a question, at least to Agnieszka and Jacek, and perhaps maybe I need to move away from something. I'm too close to the speaker. Okay. Move away from speaker. Okay, maybe I'll come over here. So one of the things I was thinking about, I'm going to go to the idea of solidarity, and I'm going to go to Belarus, and I'm going to go to feminism, and I'm going to loop back to Ukraine. And I'm hoping all three of you will have something to say about that. So one of the things I found so inspiring about what was happening in Belarus, and I know some of you have listened to me babble about this before, I felt like it was a feminist revolution of a new kind. Sławek Sierakowski did some great reporting about this from Belarus. And one of the things what caught me about it was that I felt like it was not just that you have a team of 3 women and they are, running against, a tyrannical man. It's not just that, like, can you replace male leadership with female leadership, or can you move women into the role placed by men? I felt like there was a much deeper paradigm shift going on, and an attempt to say that, can you replace a model of strength that is connected to basically cruelty, abuse, and violence, what in American English we would call toxic masculinity, but that's a very American term. Can you replace that connection of strength with cruelty, strength with abuse, with a connection of strength as horizontal solidarity, strength as caring for the vulnerable? Can you move this kind of stereotypical feminine maternal model, and can you now invert the connection between that and weakness and make it connected with strength? And again, I'll indulge my own biographical preoccupations, one of which is that when I was in graduate school in the 90s, those of us who were women graduate students in the 90s were then told by the handful of senior women who had actually broken into American academia at the highest levels that, we're going to help you, we're going to advise you. The advice is, don't have children. If you have them at some point where you don't have to go out in public and nobody knows about them and you're not in the job market. Don't talk about them, don't show pictures of them, don't offer to make coffee for anyone, don't cook for anyone, don't ask other people how they're feeling. Basically, don't do anything in the public sphere that is stereotypically connected to femininity that might be associated with women as people who care for other people. What you need to do is be self-interested, self-promoting, assertive if not aggressive, and and if you act just like men, well then, maybe people will forget that you're a woman and they will accept you on equal terms. And I'm caricaturing, but just a very little bit. And I felt like my generation of women in the 90s going through graduate school, there was already a feeling of kind of revolt against that, because there was a sense of but wait, why should that stereotypical male model be normative? Wouldn't it be better for the public sphere if these stereotypically female variables about taking other people into consideration, or feeding other people, or, asking how they're doing, or if this model of caring, isn't that what the public sphere really could use more of, instead of what it should be purged most of. You know, and what I saw in Belarus was actually a very sophisticated formulation, you know, of that much less sophisticated sentiment that we had had as graduate students. That like, that's what should be, and that's what, that kind of solidarity, that kind of association between strength and caring should be in the public sphere. So I want to throw out this question about, you know, one, like the moment that the lesson of feminism is not just about women's rights vis-a-vis men. Like maybe that is the key to understanding how we can move forward. The lesson of what solidarity means, how it means taking care of the most vulnerable, you know, because we are all connected. You know, and because violence does tend to get enacted on the most vulnerable. I was just reading the New York Times reporting about what people were going through in Iraq and Kuwait when the temperature was 140 degrees and they had to work anyway because they had no other money and they didn't have air conditioning and people were just ending up in the hospital and dying of dehydration. And then the thing that I'll add for that about Ukraine that I've been fascinated by is the relationship to animals, which I don't think I've ever seen messaging in a war like this about animals. Like and I think this is connected to the environment as well, and there's been a lot of connections between ecocide and the fate of the animals in the Ukrainian messaging. Because as Russian messaging has increasingly dehumanized people in general, and Ukrainians in particular, Ukrainian messaging has responded with the humanization of animals. You know, my kid's favorite, my daughter's probably not in the room, is this like little Jack Russell Terrier named Patron, who is a landmine sniffing dog, but he also moonlights as a comfort dog, and he does yoga and wishes everyone namaste on his Twitter account. But there's a tremendous amount of social media messaging about the dogs and the cats who have been orphaned and adopted by the soldiers, you know, the attempts to feed the animals that have been victimized by shelling or orphaned or, you know, or killed at the zoo or injured, or the dolphins who have been evacuated from, you know, Dnipro to Odessa, or the baby wild pig being bottled fed by the unit of soldiers, or like the hedgehogs and the kittens being rescued from the flooding. I've never seen, and I don't know if it's happened in the history of warfare before, this kind of messaging attention to animals and to the desire to take care of animals as almost a kind of symbol of the most vulnerable. Like, we are also going to rescue all living beings because it's our job to rescue. So I thought I would throw those questions out to Slavko, to Agnieszka, and to Jacek to talk about solidarity, feminism, care for the most vulnerable.
Sounds like my turn. Okay, I'd like to start by thanking Elżbieta for having me here, but also by remembering a person who made me a feminist to a large extent, a person with whose image the first Manifa in Warsaw marched proudly on our banner. We had Virginia Woolf, I think we had Mary Wollstonecraft, and we had a picture of Anne Sneto. So I wanted to remember her. I miss her a lot. I'm afraid I will disappoint you. I don't think feminism is about kindness and caring and loving animals and saving the world through kindness. I actually think feminism now is a furious, angry movement which refuses to play that role. On the other hand, the change that you're describing, I think, is real, but I think it's generational. I think it has to do with the young generation of both men and women, being sick of the kind of capitalist ethos that we grew up in. And I think we're more or less of the same generation. I hear this from my students, both male and female. Their favorite book on my reading list last semester, to my great surprise, was Michael Sandel's The Tyranny of Merit. They think it's just a brilliant argument. He's not leftist enough for them, but they completely buy his argument. So as for the place of feminism in all this, I'm much more sober, maybe a little cynical, and quite disappointed in some ways. And I want to talk about this, my new relationship to feminism that came about after the invasion. So first of all, I realized quite quickly that my research on the anti-gender movement is very much relevant to what is happening in Ukraine. In other words, that it's not just decorative rhetoric when Putin speaks of the need to defend the Balkans against the outrages of genderism, the compulsory LGBT marches. When Orban uses the election last year to talk about gender, the infamous referendum asking Hungarians whether they want to protect their children against genderism, that is all part of the same puzzle. And you may remember I asked this innocent-sounding question during our morning discussion, whether you think the word fascism is relevant. And of course, I personally think it is. I was shy about using it until recently, but I'm actually, I do believe what we're witnessing is a worldwide wave of fascism. And I think feminism is in a troubled relationship to this phenomenon. That Western feminism is not quite ready to witness what's going on, and hence my disappointment. One of the speakers this morning, I jotted down the name. I hope I got it right. A woman from Kiev, Alexandra Sauliak. I don't know if she's still here. She talked about working in Berlin, I think, somewhere in Germany, at an editing house, and finding herself in the position of having to work with texts of angst-ridden Germans who feel that a more moderate position on the war in Ukraine is needed, and it was one of the few voices this morning that sounded desperate, not hopeful, not just happy to be here, but actually deeply disappointed. I felt the same way a month after Bucha, when I went to a European conference, feminist conference in Italy, and found myself among a few Eastern Europeans who were trying to introduce the topic of the war in Ukraine to this very diverse and well-educated group of 400 or 500 Western European feminists. They were completely uninterested. They thought this was not of relevance to them at all. In fact, the argument was made by one of the keynote speakers that the commitment of the Ukraine of the fighting Ukraine to gay rights is a form of pinkwashing, and that it is a commitment to what is in fact American militarism. And I thought at that moment that my Eastern European identity was really quite powerfully trumping whatever feminist identity I've developed since the 90s. I was there with the Ukrainians, the Poles, the Czechs, the Belarusians, and we were raising hell. It wasn't a nice picture. So I think what we are dealing with right now is not a feminism that brings a humanizing, gentle perspective that includes vulnerability to an otherwise cruel masculine world. That's not the story I would be telling. I think we are facing a global struggle in which this new wave of fascism is invested in a language of ultra-conservative values regarding gender, reinforcing the gender binary, destroying women's reproductive rights, destroying LGBTQ rights, and in some cases killing LGBTQ people. I think Uganda was mentioned earlier today, and that one of the questions in my mind is: are they honestly invested in this, or is this just a tool? And in our book with Elżbieta Korolczuk, we toy with both ideas. We think it's both a strategy because it mobilizes people massively in defense on what this new fascism calls family values. So it's strategic and cynical, but in some cases it's also deeply believed in because we're dealing with a new wave of religious fundamentalism as well. But in a way, what do we care whether they believe it or not? My point is that on the other side, we have a feminist movement which has been put in the position of defending democracy, and not just defending women's rights or sexual minority rights, but that actually gender is a nexus in this global struggle. So that's the way I view the story. But I wanted to briefly respond to your earlier two questions, the one about pacifism and the one about evil. And they're very brief answers, and I think I might actually disagree with you on both. I was never a pacifist. I really never was. I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor, and pretty early on I developed a kind of vicious belief that people who are being killed should have defended themselves. I really missed my grandparents, and it's a childish impulse, but I never wore the symbols of pacifists. And as for evil, I've been tempted to think of this wave of fascism as a wave of evil. But I am stopped in my tracks by the realization, and I've done a lot of research on this, that they think of us as evil, quite literally so. The idea that gender is a demon has a very high position in that imaginary. The idea that demonic forces have taken over the West and have demoralized it, that the West is somehow decadent, all those horrible things that might remind some scholars of earlier versions of anti-Semitism. It's a similar discourse. That's why I'm inclined to think it's fascism. So I don't think that we should be cheering ourselves on in using this kind of moral template, good versus evil. Although it is tempting, when you look at Putin and, evil is the word that comes to mind. But I think we should make an effort to think in complex ways about this configuration and not be too easily pulled in the direction of good versus evil. So complexity and Anne Snito's favorite word, uncertainty. Thank you.
I will come back to a question concerning solidarity idea. First of all, because I work at the European Solidarity Center in Gdansk, and we were always very proud to have a permanent exhibit showing the history of the solidarity movement and the fall of communism. And one of the last rooms is dedicated to the philosophy of nonviolence. So we are showing Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Václav Havel, Lech Wałęsa. I was always very proud to propose students to read just the Nobel Prize lecture of Lech Wałęsa from '83, an amazing document dealing with the meaning of nonviolence and dealing with this really complex and dangerous situation of young workers believing in the 70s in the promise of more freedom and more equal socialist reality, and then being confronted with dead bodies on the streets in December '70 when a big wave of strike appeared in the north part of Poland. So this speech of Wałęsa was just an amazing monument dedicated to the meaning of or discovering of nonviolence. And I always read the history of solidarity movement as a kind of a synthesis in the entire history of Central and Eastern Europe, where people have learned from very tragic moments in the history. June 53 in East Germany, 200,000 people on the streets, over 50 killed. Then June 56, Poznan in Poland. Then October 56, a tragic revolution in Hungary. Of course, Prague Spring in 68, March 68 in Poland, then December 17 Poland. So it's a history of Europe in freedom, and I always understood solidarity as a moment of learning from very tragic circumstances and developing in the middle of the 70s the idea of nonviolence. So that's the end of dying on the streets. Let us organize in a different way, propose a kind of a different strategy to deal with those who are in power. And of course, the famous statement of Václav Havel, the power of the powerless, played here an extremely important role. So showing we are powerless, but it means a lot. I mean, if we really create this kind of identity of powerless, we are visible on the political scene, we are visible actors, and that's something we can build on. And but with 2014, the situation complicated, and with 2020, 2022, it was more than complicated. It was simply tragic. So I had the opportunity to meet many journalists coming from Western European countries and asking, hey, take a closer look at what is going on right now in Belarus. Isn't it just, the history, the repeat of the history? That's the industrial movement like in Poland at that time in 1980. And we are actually waiting for the new liberation wave, isn't it? And, but, perhaps it was for enthusiasts and optimists, it looked like a great moment of hope. But on the other hand, we knew we have just completely different political context, and that, unfortunately, as banal as it is, Putin is just the crucial element in it. So, it appeared, it started to appearing, the history does not repeat itself. It's just a different situation and the circumstances are completely different. And with 22, with this total war attack on Ukraine, we knew that in the 70s and especially in the 80s, we lived in a way, very lucky position to have a broader international political context that helped a lot to find a peaceful solution. I do not want to say, I do not want to ignore the workers and the members of oppositional democratic movements, but I want to underline also the meaning of the international scene, the international situation, which was simply different. So now we struggle at the European Center because we are, in the last room we are talking about the promise of nonviolence, and we see that the late modernity we are all children of, it's does not longer gives us the opportunity to say that's the solution. I think we live in an extremely complex reality where rather dialectics is the best way to understand where we are and who we want to be. And we see that the war means peace today. And it's not a joke or simple rhetoric, but rather, unfortunately, the tragic reality of everyday life in Ukraine. So that's the one point I wanted to underline. Also because I see how many of you are connected to the history of solidarity. I thought today, hearing you all, that actually what Elżbieta did, you're just the best ambassador of solidarity movement in the world, my God. And for the very first time in a place where everybody's referring to something, Pomarańczowa Alternatywa, you know, solidarity movement and so on. I just could not believe it. So I'm very happy to hear it. And I'm also very happy to hear that the term solidarity plays an important role in these debates we could see today. I do not want to be a naive enthusiast, but I was in the last years very much interested in the history of solidarity idea, which was born actually at the end of the 18th century. It's a very modern idea, and it has nothing to do with a simplicity of brotherhood or caritas, where, you know, God tells you that you have to love your neighbor. But rather, you have to take care of the others because they are part of the modern society. Everybody lives his, her own life, and we have to come up with it. So solidarity was actually a moment of a new language to describe the modern society. But also, at least at the end of the 19th century, there was a significant move, especially in France, where so-called solidarists appeared and started to think about social reality as part of the, you know, much bigger reality, also in connection to the nature, for example. So what appeared was actually sensitiveness for not only interconnectedness, but also interdependency, which played actually extremely important role. And then with the beginning of the 20th century, one of the solidarists was actually Léon Bourgeois, was responsible for League of Nations. I mean, this kind of utopian vision that we can solve the international problems. But then the idea disappeared. And it disappeared actually, I mean, after the Second World War, almost nobody was using the term solidarity. It's the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s, when the term appears again and has something to say to people. We went through very dark moments during this debate, and it's good. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's extremely important just to confront ourselves with the darkness we are observing nowadays in the world. But I also think about when I take a closer look at the social theorists in the last years and people struggling with the looking for hope, which is not an easy task, like, for example, Judith Butler, then I always see that in this, you know, text, this essay they write, the word solidarity appears every time. Very subtle, not really well defined, but it appears as a kind of sign of hope, which is so hard to describe and to express. And when I think about solidarity or metaphors connected to solidarity, one of German philosophers proposed the metaphor of immune system, a kind of a system in which we are always confronting with the otherness in order to get stronger and to broaden the horizon. It's always a very risky moment, which is part of this experience. But it's just incredibly important to go forward and to develop reality or to develop or to strengthen the life. So I do believe we are in the very hard moment to define where we should looking for the hope. But I do believe that the term solidarity is still to discover. And then after it was born together with the notion of freedom and notion of equality, it was never taken seriously enough in the history of the so-called Western civilization. And simply, it was always something hybridal, but not really serious enough. So we took care of the freedom or liberty. We took care of more or less, or better or worse, of equality. But solidarity is still a kind of a challenge for us to believe. Thank you.
The last but not the least. I know where to finish, but not where to start this discussion. So probably I'll just refer to some of the points. Probably the first point made by Agnieszka. I totally agree with you. The thing is not that simple. They're complex. And complexity is probably the best way to describe the situation. But still, some things are extremely simple in Ukraine nowadays. Because war made the things very simple, very clear, at least for our Ukrainians. And this is what I'd like to talk about the thing, because there's no doubt that there's evil. There's no doubt that there's the evil. You probably remember this famous word by Alexander Watt, when he was interviewed by Czesław Miłosz. He said that anybody who was born in Eastern Europe by the end of 19th century, 20th century, could not believe in the God. And many did. But you could not believe in the devil, because the devil was there. So what I'm telling as a historian, talking about history of Ukraine, and nowadays kind of really repeating that nowadays Ukraine is a little bit bad in the middle of this bloodlands. It's a dark, so to say, dark heart. The heart of darkness, heart of death. And this is what we have again. So actually, many people for generation of, like your parents of this generation, Leszek Kolakowski, Hannah Arendt, they clearly believed that evil is very much existence. You could not relativize it, so to say, and devil is there. And whatever you do, devil is there. Virus is there. Violence is there, so to say. So don't expect you could go beyond violence. By the way, I'm kind of puzzled by the name of this conference. Why beyond? Why beyond? What against? Why not against? Because beyond for me means some escapism. Escapism. There will be no after violence. This I would like to show you. There will be no after violence because violence will be always there. This is exactly the message of all the history, if you wish. There is a very good set of data. It's called Correlates of War. It has been started in the 60s by the team of the historians and political scientists at the University of Michigan. They collected the data, all possible data on the wars of the last 200 years. And basically what it says, there is no year, there has been no years, but there has been no war, not many wars. There was the 70s when the new wars hadn't started, so to say. So when we say there is no violence or beyond violence, we ignore something. And this is basically the message of Albert Camus. All of the kind of things we tend to belong, because violence is always there, and I believe this of the history try to tell us. So in this sense, I believe that we are rediscovering that, probably too late. I also did believe in a sense that this violence is kind of relative, so to say, but nowadays war started. I just give you some data, because it's probably too theoretical, too abstract, but just give you some data, especially the data which struck me. Probably not really related, but still, talking about ecological crisis. 50,000 dolphins has been perished since the beginnings of the war. Approximately 100,000 home pets. Several biological species doesn't exist anymore in Ukraine, like Polesian bear. 1/5 of the territory nowadays is not usable for any kind of purposes. After Kakhovka, which is like a really ecocide. So what I'm saying, Putin could not meet his original plan, which was to erase Ukraine from map of the world, but he wanted to destroy Ukraine, to bleed Ukraine to the point that it will be beyond any repair. I'm not talking about the human losses. I'm talking about ecological losses, but you can imagine what it's also kind of ecocide, because you destroy the how do you say this, natural environment. People supposed to live. I'm not talking blockade of the grain export, that kind of thing. This is part of the story. So I could go on this kind of things. And there's the evil, without a doubt. I mean, know the evil, you could name the evil and the thing. But this is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the story, which have exactly relation to the solidarity, the kind of things. Because at the same time, when Ukraine is suffering, just give you some probably another idea. The recent statistics says that 75% of Ukrainians has somebody is a relative or friend who died already in the front. A year ago, it's 45. Now it's 75. And I could not fathom, it's hard to me to think what will be in a year or so if the world war will continue. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm just saying this is reality, harsh reality. So therefore, it's not complexity for me. That's very simple. And we know that this is fascism. We call it different, called Russism, because it means fascism with a Russian twist, with a Putin twist. That's fascism, no problem for that to call it fascism, so to say. So this is what I'm saying here, that some things are very simple. But at the same time, and this is probably one which we could not explain, because I believe we lack any kind of not just language, we lack words to describe the situation. Because on the other side, the public mood is extremely optimistic. Optimistic. 90% some believe in the victory. They don't want to go to any consensus, to any kind of compromise, the kind of things. For the first time in Ukrainian history, believe me or not, Ukrainian society started to believe in government. They never did. They were much critical. Talking about LGBT, again, this is also surprising. How should I say, the level of tolerance to LGBT increased from 50 to 70 some percent, that's what I'm seeing here. Why is that? Because I believe. Because there is solidarity. And I don't believe it's a different story. It's a one story. Because on the one hand, you have destruction, you have death, you have a tragedy. And the only way to withstand this is to have a solidarity. Because eventually, I don't believe solidarity is probably the right word. I'm sorry to say, because solidarity comes by the end, it's end. I'm sorry to use be pathetic, but this is how I look at it. This is the feeling which we have in first Maidan and extremely the second Maidan. And the best way to describe it's law, an unconditional law. Why is that? Because we were standing together and we knew that we could be attacked at any given moment. Arrested, tortured, and sometimes even killed. And this is exactly the feeling that you stand there and you risk your life. It gives you the idea that you're starting to love somebody who does like that, because otherwise you would be lost. And I believe this is exactly the feeling which has nowadays in Ukraine, but this was on Maidan and now extended all over Ukraine. This is something very, 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 very important. And therefore, I lack to have this kind of words of meaning to describe this kind of feeling, because it's beyond any kind of description. Just to go there and to see there and to feel it. Would it last? Probably not. Probably will end with the war. Once we have this kind of existential threat, once not be threatened, I believe we start fighting again, because Ukraine is very good at fighting with each other, so to say. There are many reasons to fight, but since nowadays this is kind of feeling, and I believe this is something which you have to treasure, how to describe, codify, whatever, and start talking about that. It's very like in Poland. I know the many veterans for Solidarność coming to Maidan said, this is exactly what we felt, but 20 years later you have Kaczynski, and that's it. And we're probably facing the same problem. In a sense, this is what we're saying here, that there's probably nothing more that we wish in Ukraine than our victory, Перемога. But we're so afraid of Перемога. Because given the scale of problems that we face, we just could not fathom how we're supposed to deal with that. Why I'm trying to tell something here, why we fail to articulate this, and especially why we humanitarians, me including, fail to articulate this, because we keep telling in the rational terms. We keep rationalizing it. The feelings which could not be rationalized, because it's feeling very much, to a sense, irrational in a good sense. And just to have some kind of, authority, to some guru to refer to, I was very impressed once by this, probably know this book, dialogue between Václav Havel and Dan Michnik, which is a very important book. Elżbieta, I believe it's your book. It's your book, yeah. Elżbieta is everywhere. Spirit of Elżbieta. Without Elżbieta, nothing would happen. But basically, at some point, we're just kind of struck, because exactly the power of powerless. Because what Havel tried to diagnose, state of the modernity or postmodernity, whatever name it, late modernity, he says basically the main problem that we lack, we so-called political metaphysics. the ability to articulate this word not in the terms of rational, but something more, which could say, affect, imply to the things. Again, I'm saying I'm all the same. So what I'm saying here, and I probably end with this, you probably there's a famous joke by Benedict Anderson in his Imagined Communities, that there is everywhere in every country there is a monument to unknown soldier, but there is no monument to unknown liberal. And the reason he says basically, because liberals are too rational. They don't reach deeper, so to say. We have today discussion, and there was somebody, I'm really quite right, raising this issue that we have enough the religious fundamentalism and church is going to be, so to say, opposed to say. And I believe this is true and wrong. Because I believe a liberal, if they want to treat it to be serious, a liberal have to learn the language the church is speaking. Just to refer again to one of my favorite books, you probably know this book, 1917 book by Adam Michnik, Kościół, Lewica Dialogue. So this is basically his point, because there was leftist, there was a church, and they see others as enemies. They say, no, you have to start dialogue, because basically there is some values that you share. If I can, I mean, rationally, if I can relate, boil down the whole message of Ukraine in one short sentence, it sounds pathetic, but it's what I know for many people. Values matter. Values are very real. If you not start talking about values, if not talking about, not structure, structure is important, institutions are important to the thing, but the idea of the values is extremely important. I believe that most of the people now, Ukrainians, will tell that. Those special in the front, this is something which I couldn't express. Again, we should go fast, because sooner or later the war will end. And this feeling may disappear. Therefore, I like a book by Marci, Ukrainian Night, because she exactly tried to put this Euromaidan solution, Maidan in these terms, in terms of phenomenology, which is very much. And again, let me just say, I'm probably going to talk too much. One of the leading ideologue of the Solidarność was Josef Tischner, who was both theologian and phenomenologist. Leszek Kolakowski, who was a philosopher, but at the same time he dealt with a very kind of theologian question. I'm not talking because I'm from Catholic University. Don't try to sell you the Catholicism, but this is something experience, I believe, that goes beyond whatever, not beyond violence, but beyond our rational capabilities. And this is issue probably not for the humanities, for poets, for art directors and things, but this is what comes again. Art is very important. Something with this calling, dealing with this kind of the things. And what else could I say? Probably there will be no conclusion into my word, but this is the feeling that we share, many of them. We never realized that Ukraine is a beautiful country. It's sadly so that it takes a war to start to understand it. And this is probably one of the, how should I say, the saddest conclusion of my short talk, that somehow we could not start love each other without catastrophe, without a disaster, without existential threat. It was mentioned today, the doomsday clock, that this was 17 minutes toward the end of the world. 17 minutes in 1947, and now it's 90 or 60 seconds, so to say. Probably this kind of the threat, existential, would make us think in this term. But whenever we start thinking about aim, don't forget that Ukraine already has this kind of experience. Be ready to start this experience, because sooner or later, probably God's hope later than sooner, because we had to come up with this, let's say, threat, and start to develop a new kind of language. Thank you so much. I forgot to thank Elżbieta. Because without her, I hadn't been here. And say, 31 years ago, you introduced me to Adam Michnik. And this was probably one of the most important meetings in my life with you and Michnik. So thank you so much.
Well, I think I'm going to thank everybody. We are going to go on to more thanking of Elżbieta. But I think we should end with the little slogan of values matter, and hang on to that going forward. Thank you.